Tech Nuggets, network monitoring with PRTG. So we're going to talk a little about network monitoring, and specifically we're going to do a demo implementing network monitoring in PRTG. So I'm going to talk a little about network monitoring, what it is and what it's not, and that kind of stuff. And then we'll talk a little about PRTG and other products that will do that kind of thing. And, you know, we'll go on into the demo at that point. So network monitoring is a bit of an art. You have to be quite the network engineer to understand how the network's put together, to begin to look at it and understand what's going on in the system. Oftentimes with network monitoring, we're not, because of the way the network's designed or the security is involved, we can't directly see what's going on. We can only see the evidence that something has gone on. We can see latency and ping times. We can see trace routes. We can do iPerfs and other kinds of things to try to understand what's going on. And from that, we can draw conclusions. But oftentimes we struggle with what exactly is going on. So network monitoring is going to break down into about 3 different main categories. There's a lot of little nuances to each one. We're just going to kind of cover the big ones. The primary one is monitoring. Is the silly device alive? If it's on the network, generally speaking, you can ping it and we can tell if it's awake or not. It's something sitting on the IP that's supposed to be there. Now, there are certain limitations to these things, like what happens when there's 2 machines on the same IP. That's bad. Network monitoring will be fooled. It won't know. Exactly. So monitoring's not perfect, but it can tell us, is it awake or not? Notification, really important. You really don't want that phone call at 2 a.m. from your boss that says, did you know this is broken? There is only one correct answer to that question, which is, oh yeah, I've been working on it for an hour. That's the only correct answer that the boss wants to hear. Customers do not want to be notified by my customer that product is down, service is down, object is not doing whatever it's supposed to be doing. Even more with the customer, the correct answer is, hey, we're really sorry. We've been working on it for a while. We've known about it. We're doing the best we can. We'll let you know when it's back up. Sorry. Notification, right? Our monitoring software is watching and watching and watching and monitoring devices. It can also be set up to notify me. Text message, Discord, Slack, Teams, email, phone calls, you know, whatever it takes. You can set up all sorts of different things, physical and virtual notifications to let people know what's going on. And we can, of course, have it kind of go up in importance. You know, if it's been going off for 5 minutes and nobody's done anything, go to the next group of people and start notifying them, you know, escalate the problem through the system. So notification can take on kind of a life of its own as we start talking about how do I escalate this problem that's going on, and it's a big deal. Data retention and display tends to be what we do with network monitoring when it's not an emergency. When we're not in the middle of a notification crisis or a monitoring crisis, what do we do with all this data? Because you're collecting a ton of data that can be really useful for planning. We know things like, geez, the bandwidth on our uplink to the internet's really busy. We can monitor. We can pull that kind of data using SNMP, using other methods that are both push and pull to try to understand what's going on the interior of our equipment, both at an application level, at a switch level, at a router level, those kind of things. And we can use it to plan for the future. Hey, we've noticed that over the last, 300 days, we've seen a distinct uptick in bandwidth going on this link. We need to begin to plan for upgrading that link to 40 gigabits or more or less, things like that. There's a couple of things that network monitoring is not that we need to be kind of upfront about. It's not security software. It's not HIPS. It's not IDS. It's not any of that kind of stuff. If you don't know what that is, you can go look it up, but it can be used in an autopsy kind of sense, especially with our data retention, to go look at maybe what happened, but that's not what this software is. Pure network monitoring is watching the network, trying to understand the health of the network, and monitoring when something goes away that should be there. We can, oftentimes network monitoring is sold as part of a security suite or host intrusion detection suite or something like that. But generally speaking, as a concept, it's a separate entity from those security kind of concepts. really useful data can be pulled out of your network monitoring software to do that. As I said before, there's quite an art. One can make a good living being a network monitoring expert and understanding the new nuances and ins and outs. You will always find that no matter how much monitoring you've done, the network will fail in some weird and unique way that you weren't exactly monitoring for. Hopefully you've got enough general monitoring that you get there before the boss and or customer does, but sometimes you don't, and you wind up building little sensors to go in and monitor that thing that you didn't realize you needed to be doing. And that's kind of par for the course. It's tough when you're only watching the reflection of what's going on your network, and it can be very difficult and frustrating. All right, let's talk a little about PRTG. PRTG is a pay-for either hosted service or downloadable. You run it on your own gear kind of thing. It you install it on your machine. It's Windows only. So that's a limitation for some people. For other people, it's great. It's a web interface, so it doesn't require any special client to get at other than web interface. One of the limitations of any monitoring software is where you put it in your network is where it will be able to see the world from. So if you stick it off all by itself in some little teeny network that it's firewalled off from, it's very useless monitoring software. You're not monitoring very much. The monitoring host will need to be able to see most parts of the network, which oftentimes means holes in the firewall, exceptions in security policies so that the monitoring software can see everywhere it needs to see. In some cases, we can offer a remote probe where, because of firewalls or links over public internets or virtual tunnels, we need to put a probe, which is a piece of software that runs in a remote network and will report back to the primary PRTG server with whatever it has. And that way we can run tests from the remote probe's point of view and from our main monitoring software's point of view. So those are important things to remember. In PRTG especially, we're going to talk about these concepts because they're going to come up as we go through the interface in the demo portion. There's a concept of a group, which sounds kind of silly, but is fairly useful. There's a hierarchy to the way the groups are laid out, so you can have different hierarchies for different things, and inside those groups, we can make the groups do different things. They can do auto-discovery, or they can be static groups. We can have different users that can log into PRTG that have rights to see the objects in certain groups or not, so the concept of a group here comes up. Next up on the list is a host or a device. This is, of course, a device that will exist either virtually or physically on your network that you're gonna scan. It's something you want data out of. It can be anything from a temperature sensor to a router to a server to anything that's got an IP address is on your network. Most things on your network will respond to ping unless their firewall is set up otherwise. So you can get some basic network discovery out of it by just doing ping monitoring, ping scanning, using a group or something. You can set up that to just ping scan a network and get a basic feel for what's out there. It'll create hosts and that kind of stuff. Sensors. Sensors are attached to devices or hosts, and they look for a specific thing. So you'll have a ping sensor or a DNS sensor or a CPU sensor, and that sensor will use the IP address or host name of the device and go do that. In some cases, we can set up rather complex sensors that will go out to the remote device and run a script and collect the information and bring it back, and we'll parse it on the network monitoring software to generate something we just can't get another way. So we can get rather elaborate with this. It can be kind of an involved thing. Inside sensors, we can have channels. So I might have an elaborate sensor that I've built that goes and pulls 5 different pieces of information. But rather than create 5 sensors, I'll create one sensor that goes and runs the script, and then 5 channels inside that sensor that display the data that I picked up. Now, this is important, especially in PRTG, because it's a pay-for product. And PRTG hinges on pay by the sensor. This sounds kind of like it's not going to be a big deal, but once you turn loose an auto-discovery process on a network, it will find thousands and thousands of sensors. So be aware, oftentimes we'll do an auto discovery of a network, and then we'll go back and prune off 90% of the sensors because they're redundant or they're useless or they're just not information I need to keep, or I can't keep them because they're too expensive. All right, let's move on to the practical demonstration. I'll have some of that set up for you and we'll get to play with it. So as a brief overview, I kind of want to show the network diagram that we're working with so you guys will have some kind of understanding of what's being monitored. It's very difficult to understand what you're seeing if all you're getting is data from a ping scan. So it's oftentimes easy to draw it out. We use a lot of network diagrams for that kind of thing. So primarily what we're seeing here is this side of the network from this switch, everything that's attached to it. And I laid out the IP addresses. And we've used this in a couple other tech nuggets. And I've got my PRTG server down here that's doing all the tests and running all the sensors and the web interface and all that kind of stuff. I've got an Ubuntu GUI that is also on the network, as well as 3 targets that I've used in other labs. And I've laid out their IP addresses here. And they're all in the 172.21.0.0/24 network. And those are those IP addresses. And there's a network here that's between Voice 1 and Voice 2, an intranet. And then there's one remote site here that's simulated with Ubuntu Remote that's on. And those are both 2 different networks off of both sides of Voice 2. So we'll may see those as we skim along, especially if we make our subnet mask large enough when we do auto discovery. We may see those devices in there. So it's good to know they're there. But good to know the overview of what's going on. So I'm not going to go over the installation of PRTG or any of that kind of stuff. That's something that's in the manual or maybe you had instructions for. Once you've got it installed, you're going to pull up a web interface. It's going to look a lot like this. I've pretty much left the defaults there and then added a few groups and sensors to it. So the basic login is PRTG admin would get you in to what's going on. So you'll come into a kind of screen that looks like this. There may be down the right side, there may be some complaints about changing my password or using HTTPS. Those can be viewed or used as necessary. You can see I'm using a trial license here. I've got 20 days left of my 10,000 sensors that it gives me. And I'm currently using 344. So it gives you kind of an overview of what's going on. Up here at the top, often I can see I've got 2 sensors that are in error, 5 sensors that are in warning, 329 sensors that say, yes, they're great, and 8 sensors that are paused for some reason. So talk a little about that. My most used in this, I often go to devices and click on devices because that tends to get us to the hierarchical tree of what I want to look at, right? The root of the tree is up here, and then our local probe is our PRTG server. So we're going to see things like, if we open our local probe, we'll see the core health of the probe. We'll see how much disk space it's got, the NIC that it's using. Now, this is not all the information that you might get from looking at the Windows server that's running, and we'll actually see that here in a minute, where you can get a lot more information out of the device than just that. This just kind of gives you the basic probe overview of what's the probe's health. Down the side here, we can see things like, where are we in the world? There is geo information that you can put in that will, if you've got an international kind of thing, it'll show you the different links going around. You'll notice here under display monitoring, we start to see 2-day, 30-day, 365-day data. And this is where that, longevity of data comes in. Now, mine's been running a day or 2, so you're going to see some 2-day data and some 30-day data. Of course, there's no 365-day data. It hasn't been running that long. It's only been running 10 days or something like that. So it will also come pre-configured with this hierarchy already built in. And I didn't change it very much because I didn't want to mess with it. I wanted to kind of show it off. But it's showing you kind of a pre-made hierarchy of what you can put in here. Things to be monitored, things to be looked at, so that you don't, accidentally overlook something. They even add these network infrastructure things where, because of the server that's installed on, it knows what its DNS server is. It knows what its gateway is, and it can ping those things and make sure they're active and awake. And a little later, we'll talk about how do I add DNS queries so that it goes and basically does like a dig every time that we do that kind of stuff, so you can see what's going on the network. So down here, there'll be some unknown devices, which is basically, hey, this is the subnet that it lives in, and it's finding different things that live in that subnet as it goes along. And I don't normally worry about that one a lot. What I have built down here is I created my own group. So we talked a little about groups. And I created my own group. And once you're in an object, either a group or a host, these things across the top automatically will pop up. And settings is a good place to start. I gave it a group name. I told it a little about what I wanted. And more importantly, as an device identity and auto discovery group, I gave it a definition of how big's the network I want to look at. I could have looked at the entire /17 that we use in our lab environment. But I knew that I hadn't used any IP addresses bigger than that, and scanning a network that large takes a lot of time. So I narrowed it down. I probably could have narrowed it some more. And I set a couple of different things in here, like IP addresses and things like that, for just show me the IP. Don't go look up a host name, just show me the IPs. That's what I'm used to looking at. We could set up a variety of inheritance here. So for anything in this group, any device from here down will pick up this kind of stuff. So if I know what Windows systems, when I go to poke a Windows system, this is the credential I'll use. If I'm using SSH, Linux, Solaris, any of that kind of stuff, how do I poke it? Well, I gave it a username and a password that we use in lab to do that kind of stuff. There's a variety of SNMP. You can see here the defaults, which were defined at the root because our hierarchy goes down and these kind of things fall down. Was already at version 2 SNMP, so didn't need to change that one. So the inheritance of the groups can make this quite useful for when we're monitoring different parts. And you can see here it gets quite lengthy. We can change the scanning interval if you need lower than 60 seconds. Honestly, monitoring is not normally real time, so 60 seconds is probably pretty good. And you can do that. You can also limit the number of sensors if you're worried that it's an auto discovery is going to go create 2,000 sensors and you only bought 500. You can limit the number of sensors that it's going to be able to go and have in this group. Or if you have a sub customer that's only bought that many, you can do that kind of thing. Notification is also over here, where we can set the default notifications for the group. And then, of course, on different objects or different sensors, we can update that. This is setting a default that will be inherited across the rest of it. And you can see here we're inheriting these settings from the root of the tree. And it's going to send me emails. So when we install it, it's going to set up email. And I do get email push notification. It pushes out to me. You can set up apps. There's both an Android and iOS app for PRTG where you can get push notifications. There are text gateways that you can buy support for. It's outside PRTG, but you can have it text you, that kind of thing. So very useful stuff. Good to understand settings and notification. Back over here to overview, where we really... Thanks. That's super great. Where we really get into, the inner workings of what's going on. And I've closed up a bunch of these because that way we can see all the different things. And I've done an auto discovery on my network. It's actually set to run once a day. You can right click on it. And one of the joys of being an Ajax web interface is you actually get the right click. That'll work in a web interface. Many times in a web interface, you get something strange. In this case, it'll work quite well. And we go down to auto discovery and run it again. And it'll force an auto discovery out of schedule if we need to do one of those kind of things. So right here, we can see at the top, we've got, this is our PRTG server. And if I open it up, we're going to get a lot of information. We're going to get pings. We're going to get a whole ton of information. It's difficult to see a lot of the data that we might want to see this way. So by clicking on the host itself, we dig down in. Now you'll notice the data across the top stays the same, but we start to be able to see a little bit more information about what's going on. We've got pings and CPU loads. If the CPU load spikes through the roof, we'll know, how much disk space is free. It'll lay it out by disk if we've got that kind of stuff. And we can start to dig into it. It'll start to, oh, hey, it's a DNS server. Yep, it is. We've got 2 different web servers. The 8080 is the PRTG server, and we actually run IIS on the regular port 80. And down here, it's dug in and found, yep, we're running IIS on this box, and it'll tell us about the application. We can, in fact, write sensors that will do application-level testing. If you've got a shopping cart system, there are sensors that you can build that'll do synthetic shopping cart transactions to make sure they work, and it'll keep track of that information. How long did it take? Did it work? Did it not work? What does that mean? Because oftentimes a ping just tells you, is the box up? Man, when I'm doing $10,000 an hour, I need to know that shopping cart system works. So I'm going to need to be able to dig in and find that. Here you can see we get a ton of network information out of this and a variety of this kind of stuff. And sometimes I keep it, sometimes I don't. Oftentimes when you tell it to do the auto discover, it will find a ton of different things. We can use both SNMP and WMI, which is Windows Management Interface, to dig information out of boxes. There's another tech nugget. We'll talk about SNMP, Simple Network Monitoring Protocol, which is a pretty standard way of digging information out of network attached gear. And we'll talk a little about that. I use the breadcrumb across the top a lot. I'll go back and click on just the group name, and that'll take me back to the group. But all of these can be set up that way. Ooh, one thing that is very much worth knowing, when we look at our ping sensor, and we'll go in and look at settings on it, and down here it'll have schedules and dependencies. Dependencies are very important. we've set the ping sensor as the master sensor for the parent object. And what that means is, if, let's say, we lose power to the device, well, all of these things could go crazy on me, right? I'd start getting notifications for all of them, right? Because it would say, oh my God, they're all gone. And notification would just start to squeal and throw out emails or text messages or whatever, drive me crazy. 2:30 in the morning, I don't need to be digging through an ocean of notifications to figure out the basic problem. What that means is we can use a ping sensor as a master sensor, and everything depends on it. So if ping stops, it goes and pauses all the other sensors. It's very, very, very powerful, very useful. That way we're not overflooded with information during a crisis. All right, so let's go back and look at some of our other objects that we have here that we can look at. You know, we can look at things like, we've got 7. Now, remember, our Voyos devices had multiple interfaces, all of which will have an IP address. So we may see the same device 2 and 3 times. In fact, we see Voyos 2 here twice and Voyos 3 here twice. Should give us basically the same information. Ping, hardware status, Ethernet, up and down. We might get all the same information out of it. Up times, how long has this thing been up? When was the last time it rebooted? Things like that. Now, since we can SSH into this and begin to dig out other information, I'm able to do some of that. Now, our SSH disk free is paused because it in fact errors out when I go to use it. Oftentimes I delete those kind of things. Not all tests will work. You'll have to try it and find out. But a lot of this information that's being collected here is being collected via SSH. It SSHs in, it runs a bunch of standardized kind of tests to grab that information, scrapes it off the console and brings it back as data here. So we can get a ton of different information out of the system to do that. All right. So down here, I've just run this one. This is on some of our other boxes where you can see we have the SSH disk free and it's freaked out. So we might come over here and check the little box and we get a bunch of interesting menus. We get one that says pause indefinitely. Sometimes we give it a message. And we hit pause indefinitely and it's just paused. And it'll go up here and then the little 9 will go up and my number of errors will go down, which is quite nice. There is a ticket system that's involved in PRTG. I don't use it, but it's kind of nice. If you were interested in using that kind of ticket system, it's sort of a sideline freebie. We can see down here at the bottom, I've also got another Windows 2019 box that was on our diagram, and we can see some basic things about it. We can do DNS, and the DNS queries will go and check and tell us things, right? What's it been doing? You know, and different downtimes and channels, it'll run different tests. If we wanted to go and, you know, connect a sensor to something, we might go in and say, add a sensor, and there'll be a library of sensors. And this is where the real strong point for PRTG comes up. Many of the other open source products that are in fact free, we leverage the amount of time you'll spend building the sensors. And there are a variety of easy, cheap sensors. If you just need ping and maybe HTTP or some basic SNMP, a free product will probably work really, really well. PRTG excels and continues to get updates on basically a monthly basis on the custom sensors that they can get and doing a good job with that. And we can see here that they've got a variety of most used, you know, DNS, SNMP custom, those kinds of things. You'll see down in the lower corner, this is basically how much weight, quote unquote, you're going to put on the PRTG system running it. So I don't want to run it a lot. I might want to just run it, you know, a little bit. But there's a lot of cloud sensors we can run. We can do cloud pinging. It goes on and on and on. These sensors are available in the free products, but they require you to create the scripting. Oftentimes it's not prepackaged. One of those things, if you're going to be a monitoring, you know, expert, you'll probably go to a free product and become the expert at it, and you'll be great at it. Most of us have other things to do than monitor, and we just don't have the time to dedicate to, oh my gosh, do I really have the time to dedicate to all of this? Well, maybe not. And that means we're going to have to, you know, maybe buy a product that we'd rather not, and live with it. And that happens. Let's pick a full web page. So it will go and ask full web page. What am I going to ask for? What was our we can ask for, we'll do that. See what it pulls down. All right. So we go back out here and we can say, scan it right now. These kind of things take a little time. They are not normally a real-time system. So they can take a little while for the data to come back. And that's not unusual. That's not unusual at all. Let's talk, while we're waiting for this, we'll go and we'll look at the emergency alerting system. right, which is in here. I've actually already gotten a couple of emails about this one. It's been screaming at me for a while, where you can look, and if there's multiples of them, it'll give you as much information as it knows. We can look at warnings. These warnings are set up by PRTG. It's making some assumptions about what do you see and what do you not see. You're seeing a warning here from Windows 2019 saying, oh my gosh, I haven't ever run updates. We can dig in and understand that updates haven't been run. Some of these things are set by the system, and it'll give you this red, green light, how busy it is. And it's making some guesses based on what it sees or what it thinks it sees. Up here at the top, it's telling me, I believe this it's too low. We should have more swap. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. That's part of the art of monitoring, is only the person that really understands the system will be able to tell you if that's accurate. PRTG is making a guess. It's warning you so that you'll go look at it, but you're the one that's got to figure it out. For errors, oftentimes you can just click on this and it'll take you right to the box and big red thing across the top screaming and yelling at me about what it thinks the problem is. You see a variety of great channels on this sensor of what's going on, right, bytes free and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to scream and holler and yell about it. And oftentimes, like I did before, I will just go, and if it's not something I really need, I'll just go and pause it. And in this case, we could probably go in. One of these is probably really unhappy about it. You can see we've got some live data here on different things. I'm not quite sure, honestly, which one it is. We've just gotten another one. Oh, our full page failed. It didn't pull full page data. All right, I probably need to go dork around with it for a while. It's very unhappy. It's giving me an error message up here at the top. So that's not super unusual. Sometimes you've got to go tweak the sensors to get them to do what you want to do. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this nice overview of PRTG, and we'll see you next time for the next Tech Nugget.